Welcome everyone to another episode of Obsidian Office Hours, where we're gonna talk about things happening in the Obsidian ecosystem, but more importantly, I think we're gonna talk about different workflows and questions that people have, because in case it's an obvious, a huge Obsidian fan, and happy to share my experience with it and what has worked for me. So with that, let's go ahead and jump on over into the live screen. All right, so I'm trying out something slightly different here. I'm trying to basically aim for more screen real estate, although I realize I'm going to have to cut this out of the editing. All right, there we go. Okay, so we want Obsidian Office Hours 19. Here we go. So hopefully this looks pretty clean. I just realized I need a way to see y'all's chat. This is one of the things about streaming remotely that gets a little bit tricky. But I think if I do this right, I should be able to see my channel here. Nope, not that. All right, give me one sec because I want to make sure I don't miss anything. This is live activity feed chat. Excellent. So looks like the stream manager is up and running. Great. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about ecosystem updates. As far as I'm aware so far, Obsidian hasn't released any new minor version or anything, so nothing to update as far as the software itself goes. But as usual, we have our Obsidian Roundup from Eleanor. And so as you can see here on obsidianroundup.org, there's a lot of things going on as far as plugin news. But I think the main thing I do want to shout out for those here live today is that basically there's an October Hacktoberfest going on for Obsidian. So if you want to submit your theme or a plugin, this is definitely the time to do it. So that I think there's a little badge you'll get as a result of participating. So if you're interested in that, I know it's the end of October, but wanted to at least shout that out for those who are interested in it. So that said, all right, as far as picks for this week, so look at this. So the fantasy calendar is something I've actually been interested in looking at. And so this here, look at this. Look at this view that you can kind of see basically the calendar pane and see basically different things as far as managing dates. This is pretty neat. I'm loving how as Obsidian grows over time, what we're seeing is that people are able to basically really enhance the UI more so that it has a little bit less of that markdown editor feel and more of an app that people are using on a day-to-day. So mad props to the people who created Fantasy Calendar. This is very cool. I definitely want to try that out at some point. And then the other thing though is that one of the things that I find a little bit challenging with the Obsidian ecosystem, and just because again it's there's a lot going on, is creating your own Obsidian plugin is there's a bit of a learning curve because there's a lot you have to learn about the existing API of Obsidian when you're tying it in. And it also uses TypeScript. So if you're not familiar with TypeScript, there's sort of that additional barrier as well. So there is a talk that's available here basically for creating your own plugin. So for those who are interested in doing that, please be sure to check that out. All right. So with that, any other things that I'm trying to see as far as want to make sure I mention? Oh, this is very interesting. So Obsidian RSS. For those of us who love RSS feeds, we know that, we used to have, I think it was Google Reader and a lot of other ones to keep track of things. And what would be very cool is if we had that functionality embedded inside of Obsidian. So if you want to check out this Obsidian RSS, that is basically on the way. So, which is awesome. And then otherwise, yeah, I'll leave it to you all to kind of see the rest of what's going on. But as always, it's always great to see how robust the Obsidian community is and the things that they're building. So be sure to check out the obsidianroundup.org. So how do I do that? I'm going to drop that in the chat. All right. And then, I just realized I missed some stuff in the chat because I'm still dealing with a one monitor setup. So do you use the export to YouTube from Twitch? I get 1080p when I download and manually upload. What? Okay, Jacob here telling me he's getting 1080p when he downloads. I must be doing something wrong. So I will have to check that out for sure. And then temporarily, let me switch over to the Streamlabs once again to see the past chat because my phone only sees the new ones. That's really interesting. I wish it was better in that regard. Okay, there we go. I think my phone is finally caught up as far as chat goes, so I can hide this. Great. Okay, so from Alex here. Oh, I'm only streaming at 720p right now. Really? Okay, well, I'll need to figure that out. Why it's only streaming at the 720p. I wonder if it's an internet connection thing. Alex, thanks for letting me know about that. Let me make a note of that actually in here. Check why Twitch is only streaming at 720p. I don't think it should be the internet though. I'd be pretty surprised. The requirement for streaming these days shouldn't be that complicated. But anyways, so Alex here with the do you use the Chrome Clipper for Obsidian? No, I actually haven't heard of this. So let's go ahead and let's take a look. Oh, you know what? You're probably talking about this, aren't you? I'm assuming this is an extension. Here we go. Okay. So this is here. It looks like it goes ahead and clip notes to a selection in Chrome. Oh, this is very interesting. Okay. Yeah, I got to, you know what? Let's see how it works. What's the worst that'll happen? Oh, I guess. Let's see. Use the extension by clicking this icon, manage your extension. So let me go ahead and pin this real quick. Let's take a look at Obsidian Clipper. If we click on this, it didn't do anything. Or do I need the Obsidian? Do I need the community plugin as well? Browse Chrome Clipper. Nope, not that. Let's see, Alex. Okay. So let's see, Jace Benson here. I tried this today. 720/60. I wonder why I'm not streaming at 1080. That's so fresh. Okay, well, the fact that other people are having issues with the stream quality, like figuring out how to get that to work naturally is weird. Or no, not weird. It's nice to see that I'm not the only one dealing with this because I would like a cleaner way of streaming 1080p and then actually being able to export it. So if there's a way to export directly to, oh, you know what though? For those who are wondering about the export directly to YouTube, the reason I don't do that is I actually do try to clean up the episodes before posting them. So like, for example, I do my sound checks at the beginning. Sometimes it takes a few minutes. I try to cut that stuff out. And I use a Descript to help with like the ums and the ahs to help cut that out as well. So that's one of the reasons I do that. Okay, let's see. So okay, couldn't get it to work. Oh, okay, got it. So looks like, I mean, don't get me wrong. I do like the idea that somehow like there's an extension here that I would click and it would copy, you know, setting into Chrome Obsidian. That would be nice. But that's something I think we'll save that workflow for another time, but an interesting problem nonetheless. So I'll make a note about look into Obsidian Chrome Clipper Chrome extension. Thanks to Trust. There we go. Great. That said, all right. So with that, we've gone through a few things. Let's see. Okay, great. We've gotten our ecosystem update done. And now we're going to talk about something that I've been at. To be honest, I think I've done talks about this in various forms. But I wanted to do an official stream that starts with people who are new to Obsidian so that people, basically going forward, people can look at this as a place of getting started. And then in the future, when I have time, I'll break them out into more segmented chunks that allow people to pick the individual videos. But so I know that some people here in the chat probably are new to Obsidian, or especially if you're watching it and you're wondering, well, what exactly is the deal and how the heck do I get started? So the high level pitch I would tell you regarding Obsidian is that the reason why I believe it's like, or not even I believe, the reason it's my tool of choice is because data privacy is very important to me. So I think that's probably one of the key determining factors. If you're someone who like, it's not that data privacy doesn't matter to you, but like if you don't mind trusting your data to someone who's managing it in the cloud and you trust that they're going to encrypt it properly on other basically platforms, then there are definitely a lot of other link note-taking tools. Like Roam is an example that's also very popular. But the difference is they have all their data in their database up there, whereas with Obsidian, they're all text files on your machine. And to me, that can make a huge difference when it comes to outages and just knowing that you own everything outright. So that's my small like why Obsidian might be for you or might not be. But beyond that, the thing about Obsidian, I would say when it comes to getting started is really, and I take the inspiration from Cassidy, who I talk with, we know about Obsidian a lot. And it's that treating Obsidian like a Markdown editor. So in other words, when you're getting started with Obsidian, so you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go ahead and close out my vault real quick. And let's go ahead and let me go ahead and open up Obsidian. And then, oh, I forgot. I need to open up a new vault. So let me open up another vault. Here we go. When you open Obsidian for the first time, this is probably what you're going to see. And basically, your vault is a folder that will contain all your text files. This is a fancy name for it. So we're going to go ahead and create a new vault. And then here, I'm going to call this basically Sandbox Vault. And then I can pick anywhere that I want to keep it. So for my case, I'll just drop it in my desktop because later on I'll go ahead and just go ahead and delete it later after I've done this demo. But this is the most basic of what you're going to get when it comes to Obsidian. And if you're coming from a developer background, this might remind you of VS Code, for example, and for good reason. I think a lot of what we do, there are quite a few parallels with it. And so I think this is a note-taking app, right? So the first thing I want to show you is the fact that we're creating a note, right? And so creating a new file, at least to start out, is simply done by using the Command N, or if you're using Windows, Control N. And you're greeted here with a Markdown file that's been created inside of that specific folder. So just to prove to you that this worked, I'll go ahead and say my first note, and you'll see that it's updated here as well. And if I go inside of my Finder and go inside of my desktop, where's that folder? Here we go, Sandbox Vault. You'll see that my first note has been updated accordingly, and it's there just as a Markdown file. That's all it is. And then inside of here, we have the ability to add the title. So this is my heading. And so this is using Markdown syntax. I won't be going over that, but basically it allows us to annotate our text with different stylistic features that get rendered out. So for example, right now we can see here's my grocery list, and then I can say ramen, bento, green tea, and then mochi. And you might be looking at this and you're like, well, that's kind of boring. I want to see it. What does it actually look like? This goes into the fact that as of this time, Obsidian has two different modes of viewing your notes, which is it has the raw editor view, which is where you're basically in a text file. But if I go ahead and show you, I can switch it to preview mode. And so the way we can do this using the UI is clicking here, and you notice down here, wait, is it here? I could have, oh wait, is it? Oh, there you go. Oh, sorry. They put it right here. It's the preview. Preview mode. So I'll open it in a new tab actually, so you see them side by side. You can see here, this is what's actually being rendered. So if you want to see the pretty version of your note versus the text version of your note. And this is probably the biggest differentiator to me. I found that people who are deciding whether Obsidian is for them or not, is that if they want the more Wysiwyg editor approach, which is when you're typing inside of your note, it automatically looks like this. So the best example of this honestly is Notion. And so inside of Note, actually, let me go ahead and let me open Notion real quick. Go ahead and no. Okay, hang on a sec. Let me see. That's fine. I'm just going to open this one. So I'll open this, switch on over real quick to my personal plan. Here we go. Okay, so here inside of Notion, this is the complete opposite of Obsidian right now, where if I type the same thing and I go like this, and I use the H1 for one hash and space, it automatically renders it into pretty mode. And so grocery lists, you see list automatically shows up, apples, bananas. So this is the counter example to having the sort of integrated Wysiwyg experience. Now, the advantage though of having the raw edit form though, is that later on you have the ability to unlock what we call code blocks. So being able to embed things different things. So right now, if we this is a standard code block where I can say console.log hello. As you can see here, the code snippet has proper syntax highlighting on the right. And there's even a copy, you can copy the code, for example. On the other hand, this code block syntax also unlocks the ability to use plugins to basically expand on Obsidian functionality. And so just know that that is the main thing it unlocks. And so as far as wondering the difference between the two. Now that we've kind of covered that piece of it, the main thing I think that's important for people when it comes to using Obsidian and taking notes is to simply take notes. And I know that might sound really simplistic at first from an approach perspective. But honestly, the key thing here to understand is that as you're taking notes, so right now, if we're talking about how to use Obsidian, right? The key thing, okay, so how to use Obsidian. As you're taking notes and you're okay, so uses Markdown, right? And we learned that it goes ahead and create notes, use preview and editor mode. What's great is that as you start taking notes on different things, things start to organically collect and form relationships. Because one of the things, if you've seen anything about Obsidian and sort of the link thinking ideology, is if I go and open up my graph, so here if I open up the graph view, you'll see that Obsidian actually is tracking the documents that are in here. So we can see here that these two notes, how to use Obsidian and my first note, have already been created. but you'll notice there's no relationship between them. And that's totally okay, because what you want to do is over time have your notes as they organically start to create and assimilate basically like the relationships naturally. So for example, if in my first note, I'll be like, I created a second note called how to use Obsidian. Once I've done that and I open up that graph view back again, you'll see that there is a relationship connected between the two of them. And relationship building is really what this ends up being all about when it comes to having your notes. And having those things over time show how not only they're related, but then making it a lot easier to manage it. So for example, here I noticed that in the chat, Jay's here. So the question regarding how to organize notes. Okay, this is great. So one of the things most of us come from a traditional document, or like a directory structure with document relationship. So in other words, we would, inside of our Vault, we would create a folder that's like called work notes. And so inside of here, for example, I might be like Netlify DevX meeting, right, on 2021-10, today's 28. And I might take notes on it here. And then, I might have like a personal folder with like my dev notes, right? And so inside of my dev notes here, this is where I'm going to be like, okay, let me talk about like this new script setup feature here. And then I'm going to go ahead and let me just do one more for the sake of argument where you have personal notes. And inside of here, let's say this is how to use Obsidian goes in here. So I just dragged it in, 3 folders. This is what we're used to. And I think a lot of us are often compelled to try and keep things encapsulated via folders. And this is probably one of the first things that takes a lot of getting used to with Obsidian is I have a bit of a contrarian opinion on this, which is the fact that it doesn't really matter what folders your notes live in, because the relationship between ideas goes beyond what folders can possibly represent. In other words, for example, when we're talking about view script setup, this is a developer topic, very clearly so. And so dev notes at first glance seems like it makes the most sense. But if in the future you want to go ahead and you want to say, reference it, like let's say at work, right? Inside of my meeting, I want to say like, I have additional notes I want to take on script setup in the Netlify context. Well, the problem is now you have this weird context of like, and decision tree of like, do I put it in work notes because script setup with Netlify is different than dev notes, or do I put it in this other folder? And my question to you is, why does it have to be one? And most of the times I would also argue that when it comes to notes, it often exists across multiple contexts. And the context is only as important as the problem you're trying to solve in that particular instance. So to show you that example, for instance, so let me not do a script setup in Netlify because that doesn't even, so let's say view 3 on Netlify, for example. This here, again, it makes sense because this deals with my work. I'm trying to teach people how to deploy applications on Netlify. So I'm putting it inside of work notes. At the same time, this is actually relevant to my dev stuff. So what would I typically do? So me personally, I actually just have a folder specifically for notes as a whole, because directories can be useful for other things that aren't related. And I'll explain that later. So what I do is I actually keep everything in the same directory in notes. And the reason for that is because unlike what we're used to habitually to like look for notes via the folder, right? Because the first thought people are probably going to say is like, Ben, that notes folder is going to be huge. And I would say, yes, it is. It is going to be very big. But I would say that you're not going to be looking for your notes in here like this. And it's a little bit similar, I would say, for the developers in the chat, where for the most part, when you're looking for a file, you're using a search tool. You're using the command palette to autocomplete and take you directly to the file you're looking for. The same concept exists here in Obsidian. And so for those who don't have developer sort of that context of the VS Code and looking for things, the reason why I would say I'm going to hide this right now. I'm just actually going to go ahead and so I'm going to hide toggle. No, I want to toggle the left sidebar. Here we go. The reason when we approach our notes, I think it's important to approach our notes the way, think of it like a personalized search engine. In other words, you're looking through the notes that already exist. But the reason, and so using that sort of frame of mind as far as like, because think about it, when you go on Google, you're not going to be like, hey, Google, look in this directory with this attribute for this answer. You're going to say, this is my question. Please give me an answer. Right? I think If we think of it that way, I think that begins to unlock the parallel to notes, which is when you're looking inside of your notes, you're typically approaching it from a specific context. So for me, I might be like, well, I want to talk about, I have something about Netlify and Vue 3 because I'm currently in work mode. And if that's the case, then, rather than forcing myself to directories, what I really want to do is I want to open a note. So this is what they call the quick switcher. So if you hit Command O on Obsidian, again, I haven't customized anything. This is where it basically allows you to do this very thing, which is to do a search on your existing nodes. And basically what this allows you to do is, one, figure out, A, do I have a note on the thing that I'm looking for? And two, if not, then I'm going to create a note because it doesn't exist. So as you can see here, if let's just say this list was longer, I could be like, okay, I had something about Netlify and Vue 3. Oh, I called it Vue 3 on Netlify, for example. But sometimes what I notice is that in my own note taking, I might be like Netlify with Vue 3. Netlify with Vue 3 actually doesn't exist, funnily enough. But what I could do is if I'm like, I could have sworn, let me just try Netlify. And I can say, Vue 3 on Netlify. That's what I called this note originally. Well, Obsidian then has this ability to add what they call aliases. So if you're not familiar with front matter, they're basically these blocks of metadata that you can add to your notes. So inside of here, it's basically demarked with the triple dash right here, just like that. And then you add a property called alias. And alias does what it does, for those who might not be familiar with the term, is it says, what are some alternative names that you want to name this notes? So in addition, I didn't want to just, in the time I was trying to search for this, I tried Netlify with Vue 3, but it's actually the same context. So I'm going to do Netlify with Vue 3 as an alias. And the reason this is powerful now is that by taking that small note of like my brain at one point thought of this as Netlify with Vue 3, now, in the future, when I'm in Netlify mode and I go something with Netlify, here you go, Netlify with Vue 3, and then look, the UI even tells me that it's in notes and it's Vue 3 on Netlify, which is great because I go, that note already exists. Let me go ahead and add stuff to it to be like, deploying is really easy, just use yarn dev and point it at the dis folder, right? But here's the beautiful part about this, is that once I've taken that note and I've closed it, what if I'm working on open source and this time I'm working with the Vue community and the Vue community is like, how does Vue 3 work with Netlify? Then in that case, I might actually start with Vue 3 and then it's Vue 3 on Netlify. And even in this simple example, I hope it starts to illustrate a little bit about the fact that the way you look for notes oftentimes is very contextual to the problem you have at that moment. And so your brain will naturally go towards something. And as you get better at catering and writing your notes, you'll end up realizing that by allowing yourself this flexibility of not constraining yourself to folders, you allow that dynamic interaction of like, oh, wait a second, I created that in this, and this also related to this. And then this is where you get that scaling effect of ideas being able to spread out in ways that you couldn't even imagine to begin with. And so to answer Jace's question here, regarding how I organize notes, I basically keep it all in one folder. There are some high-level things that are a little bit different that I think we'll get to. But generally speaking, I don't try to organize my notes because I'm more concerned about creating relationship and links between notes and less so about which folder they live in. Because that ultimately, so for example, right, let's take a look at these three notes we have here. In addition to having the ability to just write notes, you might have saw earlier I used that syntax of the double square bracket. This is how Obsidian creates internal links by default within its system. So here, if I link to Vue 3 on Netlify, you'll see that it auto-completed here. And so now what we see here is that if we look at Vue 3 on Netlify and we look at the local graph, so I did Command P for the command palette. And then you can see here, if I do local graph here, you'll see Vue 3 is related to Netlify DevX meeting. And so to me, the first step for anyone using Obsidian is just getting used to linking stuff together. And so as you're creating stuff, just basically start creating notes and start linking them. But the beautiful thing about linking in Obsidian here, which I think is the best part, is you don't have to link to a note that exists. So what do I mean by that? Well, what if, in addition to talking about Vue 3 on Netlify, I want to actually take a quick note on Nux 3, right? How does it relate to Nux 3? Well, it might be like, okay, remember that I need to write a note on Nux 3 on Netlify. You'll notice that this link does not exist in my directory of notes. But what it did though, look at this relationship though. This Nux3 on Netlify did get created. In other words, Obsidian was smart enough to create a reference point to say, hey, look, at one point you said you wanted to talk about Nux3 on Netlify. I've saved that and I've like basically made a footnote for you. And so in other words, in the future, if we're like, oh, how does the view script setup feature work with Nux3? Then I might like, maybe I'll link it here. And what's cool about this is if we take a look at the graph here again, and then like, let me increase the depth. And what that does is allows the different degrees of relationships. So now I'm 2 degrees depth. You see that script setup is related to Nux3 on Netlify, which is then from here related to the view 3 on Netlify. And all of this, remember, Nux3 on Netlify still does not exist as a file yet. It's just that Obsidian is so good at crawling your notes and then creating those relationships that without doing any additional work, it's basically there for you. But then and then what's even better about this is now later on, let's say it's a week from now, and I'm finally ready to write that resource. When I open up my quick switcher with Command O, I can say, oh yeah, I wanted to write about Nux3 on Netlify, and then check that out. One, it said that, hey, I found that you already have an existing note placeholder. And this little icon on the left here says, hey, it hasn't been created yet, but let's go ahead and create it. And so that's exactly what we'll do. We'll create it. And now I can go, okay, I want to, so use, once again, it's yarn generate, although this will be technically Nux2. So let me swap this out. And then check this out. When you update a file in Obsidian, it does something else that's really incredible, which is it helps to manage all the file name and relationships for you. So I mentioned Nux3, but now I realized I actually want it to be Nux2. And now you can see that it actually tells you that, do you want to go ahead and update all the internal links? And for me, I always say always update, because you've already determined that those relationships exist. And so if we go back into view 3 on Netlify, you'll see that it's updated right here, and then that didn't refer to it. This referenced it. And it's this kind of automation that I think is really powerful with note-taking, because one of the things I found people get bogged down with note-taking systems is all the administrative work that goes into managing the system. To me, your job as a note-taker is to, 1, record your ideas, 2, explore your ideas, and 3, discover new ideas based on the relationship of your old ideas. That's what's fun about note-taking. That's like the return on investment. But if every time you take notes, you have to do administrative work in order to maintain the fact that you can hopefully edit it or in the future, I think most people lose steam with that. In fact, I've found that I've lost steam quite a number of times with that, because I'm so busy about like keeping it like perfectly tidy when it's really about this organic growth over time. And so here we go. Let's see. So Alex here. Okay. So the next question here is related. So we talked a little bit about relationships between notes, but then tagging is something that I think a lot of us are very used to from other note-taking systems. And here's the great part. Tagging does exist in Obsidian. So for example, inside of view script setup, I could tag this view 3. And so what this does is, so script setup is the view 3 feature. And so I can also tag this view 3. And then if we look at the graphs, let me go ahead and split horizontally so I don't split vertically. And then let me go ahead and open up the graph view. We'll see here that inside of my display, I can actually display, not groups, where is filters? Turn on tags. Here you go. You'll see that Obsidian has created a tag relationship between view 3 here and view 3 here. And so tags work basically as you hope it would, which is that it helps to connect some of your notes together. But the downside to tags, or actually, before I flip to that, tags are advantageous because they're very strict about their naming convention. So in other words, view 3 is not the same as view -3. These are two entirely separate things. Now it does look like Obsidian does, basically it is case insensitive as far as the tag goes. But in terms of like, if you're trying to be more explicit, then view 2, for example, is again a separate tag. And so this is where this is more of an art rather than a science when it comes to tagging, which is how you'll end up doing it. So the other thing about tags too that I need to tell you about is that there is a relationship of parent-child hierarchy. So in the instance of view 2 and view 3, it's a little bit weird, to be honest, to have two separate tags. What you might actually want is to group them under an umbrella. So you might want it to be a view tag, but then you might want a child of 3. And so the reason this is nice is because I'll show you in a second. So here, let's do view 3, just like that. So did that work? That worked. Okay, so let's say in this particular DevX meeting, I wanted to do view/2 instead. Well, what's great about this now is that technically all of the stuff in here is hashtag view, basically. There is that root. So let me go ahead and let me toggle the right sidebar at the tags here. Where are my tags? Let me see, settings, core plugins, tag pane, here it is. Sorry, let me turn this on. I'll show that in a second for people getting started. So the tag pane is here. You'll see that view here is now a parent tag, and then you can see how many notes reference the view 3 one versus view 2, or you can just look at all the tags that are tagged view, which is super nice. So, and then it can keep going, by the way. So in case you're like 3 and then like, this is like 2.6, for example, then view 3.2.6. So that's like an example of how that might work. Now, the downside to tags though, is what I want to talk about, because I think it's important to understand the trade-offs of any technique you learn, is that you cannot expand on it. In other words, you know how in notes I was saying you can have alias, and there's honestly a whole bunch more you can do with it. Tags will always remain the simple string snippet, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But what you lose then is the ability to contextualize, because now if I have a tag view 2.6, right, or even let's focus on view 3, it means that every time I have a note that's like view 3 related, right? So let's talk about like a vbind styles on view 3. I could tag it view/3, and that would work. As you can see here, actually, let me start hiding stuff because it's getting a little cramped. And I just realized this is a little small, so let me go ahead and bump up the zoom a little bit. So the thing about it is, oh, did it not like, how do I zoom out? It does not like it. Come on. Zoom. All right, maybe reset. Interesting that totally, okay, there we go. Now we're good. Okay, the zoom on the chart was what botched that originally. You can see now that vbind styles is related to view 3, and it's related, and view 3 is then related to these strings. But then if I actually have a note on view 3, which I don't have, so let me go ahead and create that real quick. You'll see that now I have to kind of like then tag it view 3, and then now you have a view 3 that's done to the tag view 3. And so this is where the linked relationship is a little bit tricky. And so I would argue, or I would propose, not even argue, that if you have something that's really a topic that's broader, that wants to be able to be referenced in a more dynamic way than tags, then I personally believe that it's actually easier to just basically tell the notes that there's a view 3 relationship. And this is, in my opinion, more, let me go back. Let me open vbind styles. So here, instead of that, I personally would rather just have a note for view 3, because view 3 then becomes something that I can build on and expand on. So we can see here, let me just add one more here, view 3, swap out to view 3. And then there we go. Now view 3 is related to the correct ones, but then if I open up view 3 as a note, I can contextualize it further. So I actually have found that I personally have a stronger preference towards creating actual note links to topics that I want to expand upon. Because I think a lot of us are used to blog posts that are like hashtag JavaScript, hashtag this. When it comes to ideas and relationship and sharing, it's better I found, especially if they're topics, to just be the notes themselves. So just a note for JavaScript, a note for psychology, a note for note taking. That works better out. What tags I do find are very useful for are things that are more like attributes. So for example, knowing that this is type blog post, right? That I'm writing a blog post on vbind styles in view 3. This I find this is useful, because I don't need to expand on what a blog post is, and what I'm trying to do is aggregate different properties of basically the document going forward. So this makes it also super easy when it comes to searching for things, right? Because if I'm ever like, hey, I want to find out all of my blog posts, it's right here. And then other things that I do it for, I might say what status it's in. So I might want to say that what are the stuff in backlog, right? Versus, let me go and open this note, for example. Let's say this is also a type of blog post. But also, you see the autocomplete? It's like a type. I like it. I like that it's very consistent. And then this time, though, instead of status, this one is complete. And so with tags, I get the ability to easily go, well, I want to do type blog post and status backlog. I'm going to see what exists. Did I botch that somehow? Oh, wait, I don't think I need the and actually. Yeah, okay, I didn't need the and. Searching in Obsidian is a whole topic we'll cover another time. But as you can see here, boom, this filtered out everything so that only the blog post with the complete shows up. And there are ways to do this in like dashboard views and stuff, but let's stick with the fundamentals right now. And so let's see. How do you do that? Okay, sorry, Jace. Search in the command palette. Ah, yes. So if you command palette, the command is command P, but then what I usually use is called a quick switcher. And so command O is basically the shortcut for it. But my recommendation, even when you're just getting started, to be honest, to build a habit, what I recommend is actually making this your default command for even creating a new note. So to show you what I mean by that, we're going to go into the settings. And the way you can do that is by clicking this gear on the lower left, or you can hit command comma. And this will open up basically this menu right here, this modal that allows you to configure things. And the one I want you to get a little bit more familiar with, especially for those of us who prefer hotkey binding, basically using the keyboard to do everything rather than having to use a mouse, for example. In here, Obsidian has one of the best hotkey configurations I've seen honestly, across apps in general. Because, for example, the quick switcher, right, currently is bound to command O, which is totally fine. I think opening makes sense, like command O. But what I want to also bind is a second key command. And typically, a lot of places won't let you do this. But let's say I want to add another hotkey. Although, I just realized, normally I thought they do let me do two. But anyways, okay, even if not, command N. That's kind of interesting. I wonder what happened. Anyways, you'll notice it tells you exactly what hotkey and conflicts it, which is great. Because then I can go to create new note. You can see the conflict here. I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. And then I'm a little surprised though. I thought it would let me do, oh, it does let me do two different ones. Oh, okay, great. I thought that was weird. So here we go. Now I've configured quick switcher to be N and O, so that if I'm like creating a new note or opening a note, it goes to the same place. Because once again, the beauty of it is when you're like, okay, time to create a note. Let's create a note on Nux3, right? Nux3 doesn't exist. This is great. And so if it doesn't exist, I can just hit enter and create. So in other words, this is already, like, it's still a similar prompt. You're still creating things. But the beautiful thing is that as you're typing, you will have the opportunity to get inspiration on what your brain has already taken notes on in the past. And I can't stress that enough. That, I think, is the key to developing any sort of system, is the ability to iterate on past work. But the problem with most note-taking systems is that a lot of times when you create a new page, that page gets buried. You know, especially for those of us who've used Notion a lot, you probably have that feeling where you're like, I know someone created a Notion page somewhere. I've tried using the search to find it. I have no idea where it is, so I'm going to create a new note, right? It happens. But by using this quick switcher as your default, the benefit you get from this is that you really are giving yourself a fighting chance at using notes that previously existed. Or like I showed you earlier, if you realize your brain doesn't really want to call it that or wants to call it two different things depending on the context, it's easy. You add an alias and then you've accommodated for both situations. So that's how I do that. Okay, so here we go. This is a great here. So from Deeply Brown, I absolutely love tags because I'm coming from the Bears notes, but tags can easily get out of hand and can become unnecessary overhead. Yes. So I also Deeply Brown, I use Bear a lot as well. Actually, I realized my camera shifted. Shoot, am I in? Okay, I'm in frame. Great. I come from a Bears note as well, where tags were the way I linked to everything. And I think Rome was the one one of the ones to try to pioneer this idea, is that tags are great. And to Deeply Brown's point, they get overwhelming. I think it's because you eventually find yourself restricted to it. Because like I said, if it's something like, I'm trying to think of a good example here. Basically, there are cases where your brain is going to start trying to use tags that don't necessarily fit under the same umbrella. And so what I mean by this is, let's say, okay, this is a little bit contrived, but I need to, let's say we're talking about Obsidian, the rock, right? Because Obsidian, if you didn't know, is like a gem. And you want to tag it Obsidian. Well, here's the problem. Do you mean Obsidian the rock or Obsidian the app? And so you might say, well, I guess I could create like a subcategory of like app And then I can also create a subcategory of rock. But then this is a little bit weird, because what if in the future you're talking about note-taking apps? So then are you going to go like, well, I guess I'm going to do note-taking app / Obsidian? And so this hopefully I think demonstrates a little bit of that sort of the fixed nature of tags, which is that when your brain wants to do something, it kind of ends up limiting you, because you're like, that's kind of what I wanted, but I wanted to be able to also name it this other thing because I wanted. And this is why I'm saying I think the links are a better default when it comes to these sort of conceptual ideas. And treating tags as attributes is key, because you're going to always want to know exactly what status is. You don't want to name one backlog, one icebox, one whatever. It's always going to be status backlog. And then the nice thing is there are apps to help with this. It's easy to refactor them too. So if backlog wants to be renamed to icebox for whatever reason, you can go through and just update that tag and it will update everywhere. And so when you know for a fact that it's going to be very consistent and that it's basically an attribute of a note, I found that tags are basically perfect for that. Beyond that, honestly, go with the notes linking, because it's easy for you to expand on it, build on it, and then alias it different ways. So that, if, Obsidian Rock is the name of my note, I could also be like, well, it's technically a gem too. So you know what? I'm going to make an alias that's like Obsidian Gem. And so that way, if in the future I'm just like I'm learning about gems and I want to talk about Obsidian the Gem does show up here, right? I don't have to like create a new tag that looks for Obsidian Rock, but also is tag Obsidian Gem. And that kind of like funkiness that can really get confusing. And then so Jacob here with a great point here about the tags also being a form of folders, really, because it is a little bit that fixed location of like, it is definitely this thing, right? It is definitely in this folder, but then it also kind of lives in other folders. And then anyone who's done this a lot will tell you that if you try to go pure tags over time, it can be a lot to manage, which is why I find note linking. So once again, my wrap-up thought on this is that tags are great for attributes. So if you want to, it's a type note, it's a type blog post, type whatever. Typing notes is one way I use it. Status, as we saw earlier, is a great way of being consistent with like things that are in progress, things that are not. And then otherwise, I honestly say focus on the links, because that's really what you're here for. You're here for the relationships. So, and more importantly, you are not paying by the note. It's not like when you use tags, it's cheaper than using notes. There's no as far as I'm aware, there's no like performance cost to this. So why not use the thing that's usually more fully featured, and then basically only use tags when you're pretty sure that you only need it for like very limited functionality. My 2 cents on it. Okay, so, here, actually, before I can move on, Jace here with a great question regarding tags in meta versus inside of the note. So let's go back into our Obsidian Rock. What basically here, what Jace is referring to is that inside of this front matter at the top, we actually can have a tags attribute where we could say rock and we could say gem, for example. And you'll notice here inside of our tag pane now, gem and rock actually do appear. And so this is the equivalent of doing rock and doing gem. These two lines are absolutely equivalent. As far as my opinions on it, honestly, I say do what works best for your brain. For me, I try to keep my front matter as minimal as possible, and I actually do tend to use tags more like something that it's more of an addendum to my notes. And so to switch over to my vault, let me go ahead and open up another vault. Let me open up my digital forest. So here, for Obsidian Office Hours, you'll see that up at the top, I keep it pretty minimal. Like I have a UUID, which don't worry about if you're new. We'll explain it later. And then I also track the dates it was created and modified. Once again, that's more of a philosophical take. So really the note, basically it's this for most people. And then I keep most of my tagging, to be honest, at the very bottom. And the reason for that is, once again, I personally am treating my tags as properties of a document so that I can aggregate them later on. So I can look at all of my content type. And so in this case, I need to stat it. This is actually in progress right now. And then this allows me to like call it query later on when I'm creating dashboards and stuff of like different pieces of content that have different things. So what are all my live stream stuff that are in progress or need work? How many times have I done public speaking, right? And so that would be fairly easy to do by querying like all the public speaking stuff I've done. And so that's how I'm currently using it. But actually, here's a great example of where platform really shouldn't be a tag. Honestly, it just makes more sense for me to just say Twitch here. And then that's it. The platform I found that doesn't, I didn't find that very useful. And so actually, and what team it's related to, honestly, this is like a Ben Kozen thing. So I really don't need it. And so this probably makes more sense moved up here as like I don't know. I as you can see, I'm clearly playing around and trying to figure it out. But those are my kind of 2 cents when it comes to this piece. And so Jacob here, are there considerations for where the tag is located if you're searching it with data view? I don't think so. As far as I'm aware, once Obsidian ingests everything in your file, it just gets exposed as properties. So what is in the front matter as tags shouldn't change what's in like the footer, at least for me. So the back matter doesn't change. Okay, so now that we've, I think, done a high level of getting started with Obsidian, although gosh, I really want to create a whole course around this. So this is, I will say that. What I think a natural segue into this is a question that I got last week regarding CRMs. And so don't worry, if you're still new to Obsidian, this is still relevant. I'm going to segue this and transition in a way that's still relevant. Because CRMs, for those that don't know, at least as far as I understand it, hopefully I got the acronym right, is basically a customer relationship management system. And in other words, what traditionally CRMs do is they allow you to say, if you're a salesperson and you say, someone told me to contact them in a month, a CRM would allow you to enter their contact information and then let you know that like in a month, you're supposed to reach out to this person. And so in other words, at a higher level, it's really relationship management between people. And so this is where we can talk a little bit more about taking your notes to the next step, because I'm a big believer in personalizing your notes to how your brain works. There's a whole talk I did that I don't think I uploaded yet, but I'll get around to it, about note paradigms. A lot of people have really opinionated ways on how to do notes. I think it's important to do what feels natural to you, that solves a problem that you care about. Otherwise, all the techniques and all of the abstraction in the world is not going to really help because you'll never ever use it. And so this here is an example of where, let me go ahead and switch over back to the vault real quick of the sandbox vault so it's a little bit simpler. There was a question in the chat earlier regarding when a folder is actually useful. Because again, I think it's important to clarify this. It's not that folders are bad. We just have to understand the trade-offs of it in how fixed they can be as far as like your note exists here and only here. So one, you'll notice that I notice all of my notes are actually being created outside in the root. So inside of my setting, I can actually configure it by default that I believe it's editor. Is it editor? Maybe core plugins. Where is the setting for creating a note by default? Appearance, themes, files and links. Here we go. Okay, so deleted files, move to switching tracks, that's fine. Default location, yes, in the folder specified below. So let's say I want to, by default, create all my notes in notes for now. And so let me go ahead and take this, and let's move this all into notes. And then I'll move this into my notes folder here. And then let's delete these folders here. Yes, don't ask me again, just delete and delete. Oh, not notes. Let me delete. Okay, great. So now what we have here is we have a folder of notes. And why did I do that? Because folders, in my opinion, are great when you know for a fact where things are supposed to go. And so one of the things when it comes to CRMs or like this problem is that eventually your notes start to take a life of its own and you start to realize that you want certain notes to mean certain things. So these notes here are things that we just talked about conceptually, right? Ideas. But what if you wanted your notes to be like people? Because you want to keep track of that. Well, in my opinion, this is where it might actually be good to have a folder that's for people specifically. And so one of the things here, let's say we're talking about myself, right? Ben Hong. Ben Hong is a person, and Ben Hong is a person inside of here. And what's great about this is that you start to be able to then take notes on Ben, right? So, like what platforms is Ben on? Right, and you can be like, well, Ben is on, like, we just create a quick list, right? He's on Twitch, he's on Twitter, and he's on YouTube. And it's like, okay, great. And so now that you have this, what's great about this is that now if like, let's say in the Netlify DevX meeting, we could make a heading that's like attendees. And who attended the meeting? Well, Ben attended that meeting. And you might be wondering, well, why is that significant? One of the hardest things that has been tricky, I think, to do across note-taking in general is to see your notes across different dimensions and different axes. And that probably sounds really like fluffy and like, I don't know, like sci-fi, whatever. But I think it's important because it's one thing to look across concepts as far as the content of the note. It's another to look at the relationships across different metrics that are important. So for instance, if I'm curious about the last time I talked to Ben or when I was in the meeting with Ben, the reason this is really powerful is because if we take a look and hide all of our notes in the past, what we end up finding is that if we go over to the Ben note and we look at this sort of backlinks for Ben, you'll notice that it actually tells you when Ben was mentioned in previous notes. And so in other words, I can say, oh, right, Ben was in that meeting for Netlify DevX on this particular date. And so this is what I mean by dimension and axes of seeing notes, is that there probably will come a time in your notes journey where different things start to matter to you. And so I think people is one of those things that's actually pretty common, because one of the things you might want to do is take notes on Ben. So you might be like, what shows does Ben like, right? And so you can imagine if you're taking notes and you're writing notes as you learn stuff about your friends, you can be like, oh, well, he really loved Full Metal Alchemist, Brotherhood, for example. And then Sword Art Online and, My Hero Academia, right? And then so these are like some of the things, and like, oh, he really likes Squid Game, right? And so what you saw I do here is you'll notice that all I did was just take notes on the different things that he liked. And what this gets us is already, look, Ben is connected to all these cool, all these things. I don't know, they're cool. Actually, some people might think they're uncool. But then in the future, if you're like, okay, let's talk about, I'm going to just say Amber Smith, right? And you find out that Amber Smith also likes Full Metal Alchemist. Well, if Amber and Ben are two different friends that, frankly, maybe you're starting to come up with I don't know, I'm just going to run with it. Full Metal Brother Alchemist, little get together because they're releasing the movie. You could be like, oh yeah, Ben and Amber both let me invite them to the watch party, for example, right? This is a way of organically solving a problem using work that you did very naturally, which was just oh yeah, Ben likes this, Amber likes this. Oh, check that out. They share this relationship between the two. And so then this brings us to another aspect of a CRM, customer relation management. And again, actually, I'm just going to call it a relationship manager going forward. So just relationship management is understanding how things work across time. And so something that a lot of people do use Obsidian for are what are known as daily notes. So in other words, I'm going to create a new folder here, and I'm just going to call this timeline, because this is about time, in my opinion. And so in here, I might have what I call daily notes. And so an example of a daily note is something that's time-stamped specifically to a date. So for example, I think the common syntax is to use the ISO 8601 format, which is basically what most people use internationally, which is year, month, day. That tends to be the format people use. And inside of here, this is where you'll take notes. So be like, today I streamed on today is Thursday, not Tuesday. So I streamed on Obsidian Office Hour, and I talked with Amber about Full Metal Alchemist, right? You could just take notes on whatever you care about, right? You could be like, well, I ate lunch at cool restaurant, And what's great about this is that when you create these kind of notes that are daily notes, one, you end up getting a bit of a timestamp. But what's really cool about the notes, though, is that you basically start to be able to attune notes to different times. So for example, let's say on view 3, we want to log our learning journey. So what I could do is say, this is my logs. And on today, right, on 10/28, I learned about script setup, and, people really like vbind styles on view 3. And then I can go through and say, okay, well, here, let's just say, for example, on the 30th, it's going to be there will be a discussion about this new feature, right? And this might seem insignificant at first, but the reason this is incredibly powerful is because remember I talked about looking through notes at different dimensions? In addition to being able to looking through at people, the other dimension I think people honestly will end up finding very useful is time. And so sometimes you're looking through to see what did I do during a month, during a day, during a whatever. And so if you're ever looking back at 1028 specifically, you can actually see where 1028 was mentioned in other notes. So you get this sense of like whatever you took notes on today, in addition to how this is managed over here on the right. They'll be like, hey, also I did something on this, and then, oh, look at that. This is where I learned about this stuff. And this is nice because you get this organic way of capturing and exploring notes in a way that makes sense to the context of, sorry, I was checking the chat for that. It makes sense to the context of whatever the problem is you're trying to solve. And so I see here Deeply Brown mentioning something a trick that I do for mentioning people, because it's starting to be common more in note-taking apps, is I actually prefix all of my people with an @ symbol. And the reason for that is because as your notes get bigger, what you end up finding is that if you just do B, there's a lot of stuff that's going to start with B. And so to help the autocomplete a little bit faster, I do an @ symbol, and then it only queries people, for example, in this case. I'm on the verge, I think, of adding basically any proper noun, or like any names and locations, I think, are going to end up being @ symbols for me personally. So I've started, I'm adding a new dimension that I'm curious about, which is location, because as I'm taking notes on restaurants or places, I want to know that, what are the best places to eat in Austin, Texas, or in Portland, where do they say is the best pizza? Because for those that didn't know, apparently there was an article that called Portland the best pizza town. So let's just say that when Jason said that in our team meeting, he was choosing violence because people were very not happy with that claim. So Wingmat here, which mentioned it, which is again very important, is that Obsidian manages all these relationships for you so that when you make those updates, like I renamed the files here, it updates it everywhere. And so being able to trust your system to manage these little tasks allows you to do the things that, in my opinion, are the most important about note taking, which is taking the notes and then letting the software do the admin stuff, so that if in the future you're like, you know what, I really don't like the @ symbol, you can just delete it in the file and it will update it everywhere else. You don't have to worry about that. You do what makes sense to you in the moment. And that to me is the key to any successful note-taking app, is it's just the ability to facilitate ideas without administrative overhead. And so in addition to tracking things as far as relationship management goes, my basic thing regarding this is, so I've talked to you now about looking at notes through the dimensions of people and time, and then the ideas themselves would just go in notes, for example. And again, this separation is helpful because at this point, I am very the people category is very broad and it will never be segmented. No one can be a note and a person at the same time. There's no hybrid of that. So I can be very clear about that. And so when you have clean information architecture like this, I find folders are very, very useful. And again, timeline. I think timelines are useful to separate from notes because you're looking at things from a different perspective. Your sliver of focus is basically your day. And so for those who are wondering, though, they're like, Ben, I really don't like 2021, 1028. That's not how I think. I'd say, I get it. Guess what? You can do an alias and you can say October 28th, 2021. And so going forward, if you're I want to talk about the last time I talked, I'm talking about myself is a little bit weird. So let's say the last time I talked to Amber. So sometimes what I've been doing lately actually is I have a log section in a person note because I try to keep track of, especially if I have one-on-one conversations, it's nice to know at different timestamps what I learned about a person or things that I can remember for the next time we have our one-on-one. So for example, I can then go October 28th, 2021. And you'll see here, by the way, the syntax here is how Obsidian does aliases, which is that it says, this is the original note. This is the original file name. So this is the source of truth. But this is what I want you to render. This is what I want you to render out to the screen. So if I switch this over to preview mode, you'll notice that the logs actually say October 28th. They don't say the 2021 10/28. And that's as simple as adding this pipe character. And so just so you know too, though, you don't have to add all your aliases here. If for whatever reason inside of Amber Smith, I really don't want it to say October 28th, 2021. Let's say I'm going to assume it's 2021. I could just do this, and this is still perfectly legal because all I'm doing is telling Obsidian to render out a different label than the original file name. It doesn't have to be updated directly inside of your file right here. But okay, so now that we have so I'll keep the full thing here. So now that we have it here like this is where I might take notes to be like, oh, Amber's going on vacation to Hawaii for 2 weeks. And then, and also like Amber is also watching, My Hero Academia, right? And so the reason I find this really useful for relationship management, because at some point, people, I think, have this thought of like, well, I mean, shouldn't I just remember these things, right? I think there's that sort of judgmental overtone I've heard sometimes with this. And I kind of like, why? Why should you treat your brain as something that's supposed to like have this permanent database that remembers everything? I found that that's unnecessarily stressful. One, don't forget, Obsidian is something you completely own. So you only share whatever you want. So I do streams, so I am very careful about what people notes I do show so that nothing private ever shows up. But for most people who are just taking notes for themselves, this stuff is always going to be just for you. And it's nice because you know why? If I have a month, later on when I'm talking to Amber, and let's say the next time I'm going to talk to Amber is like the 10th of November. Well, what's really great is that really naturally I can just open up the note, and then when I'm talking, I can be like, how was Hawaii? As opposed to like, oh shoot, I know she went on vacation. Where was that again? Because let's face it, the internet has made it so that we have a lot more connections that we used to have. It's not like we just talk to like the 4 or 5 people in our circles. A lot's going on. So you can just be like, how was Hawaii? And then you can be like, oh, I've been watching My Hero too. How has, like, what episode are you on? What's that? Like, to me, the reason why I don't think this taking notes like this is weird on like your interactions with people is because I think it does what is meant to, it gets at why you're doing this, which is developing the relationship to be deeper. Because I don't think people, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't care if you took a note and remembered that, like one of my favorite characters from Avatar: The Last Airbender was Uncle Iroh, right? The fact that you took the time to remember that, to me, is what deepens that relationship. And to give you an actual real use case scenario of this, my buddy Hung Soo, which you may have heard me mention from time to time, he's like my note-taking partner in crime who's been absolutely wonderful on this journey. For my birthday, he was trying to figure out like what he wanted to get me and thinking about like what I might enjoy. And he remembered through his notes that I did like Avatar: Last Airbender. And what he did was he realized through another note that he connected that if you go to, I don't even remember the service anymore actually right now. There's a service that lets you hire celebrities to like do like little messages for people. And so celebrities are voice actors. And so he found the voice actor for Uncle Iroh and had him like do a little happy birthday like video message, which was amazing, right? And I could not care less that he used Obsidian to facilitate that, because the thought and time and effort that went into that meant the absolute world to me. And so if taking notes like this can help deepen the relationships you have with the people around you, like, to me, like at least for me, once again, to me, there's no question as far as the value of doing this kind of work and tracking this stuff. And so anyways, that's my little anecdote about, so relationship management, right? To kind of, I think, put a bit of a bow on doing this stuff in Obsidian is basically a matter of creating people notes so that you have the individual notes. And so, for example, I know that, on the developer experience team at Netlify, there's like a channel in the larger company called like We Over Here, where people write funny quotes that people said. And so sometimes I think Cassidy does this, where they'll write funny quotes that people have said. And so, and then what's nice about this too is that then you get to like attribute things back to certain people, that kind of stuff. And so also, if you're wondering, so this 11:10, by the way, when we're talking about relationship management, what's great about this though is that even though, for example, we all know it's not November 10th, I'm not a time traveler, but if I want to be like, remember to ask her about the blog posts we're collaborating on, right? The reason this is great is, one, if I'm talking to Amber and I'm opening Amber's note directly, I will see this on the 10th and I will be like, yes, ask Amber about the blog post. But what's great is if you're doing your daily note, so on the 10th here, you'll notice that I actually see this right here. So without even doing any additional work, right? Because my context at the time was, oh yeah, Amber, make a note that I need to ask her about the blog post later. This shows up in as basically a automatic dashboard view, so that when I'm writing my daily note for the November 11th or 10th, I already see that I actually need to reach out to Amber about the blog post. So even if she cancels the meeting, I should write an email, whatever. So this here is incredibly useful. So, so would EGB here. I start a new job in a few weeks into a bigger dev team that I'm used to, and this is a great idea. The idea of creating without creating the page changed the game for me. I love this from Ben. Okay, so that's just it. So Wood Edge, this is the key. Honestly, I actually did have Obsidian by the time I joined Netlify, and I did this. When I met with people, I would just do like this. I would say Command N, I'd be like, onboarding meeting on 2021-10-28, for example, right? And I'd be like, yeah, I learned about HR and processes. And I'll be like, met Melanie, Campbell, and, whatever, John Dean, right? And what's great about this is that's all I need to do. And because for some of you, you may be thinking, well, I don't even know if I'm going to talk to Melanie again and John. And to you, I say, it doesn't matter, because it doesn't cost additional memory for this to exist. But what's beautiful about this now is that, let's say I never meet Melanie, I never talk to Melanie for another 5 years, right? I only talk to Melanie in the onboarding call. But 5 years later, I actually end up running into Melanie at like a conference, right? And I'm like, oh, I'm at conference 2020, 5 years from now, 2026, right? And then I was like, met Melanie. Wait, is Melanie? This is not the same. And I could open up the Melanie Campbell and be like, holy smokes, we met at the onboarding meeting at Netlify. Like, that kind of discovery to me is priceless. And all you did was simply, again, hold on, before I get to the caveat. This kind of discovery is what makes this kind of note-taking relationship thinking the most exciting. It's because the more you do this over time, the more it builds on itself. And you just get this wealth of data and connections that you can, because you lived it, you met her. Why should you have to sit there and go let me dig through my LinkedIn and see if she worked at the same, no, you can just, there you go. And then, that's so great. Now, the caveat I wanted to mention, though, before I think this is actually quite important, is it can be one of the hardest things I dealt with, because I'm a person who tries to I can be a perfectionist at times and try to archive everything, because you just want to capture everything, right? You're like, well, now that this is possible, I'm going to throw everything I can into Obsidian, right? And then if you're not careful, that can lead to a bit of burnout. And I'm speaking from personal experience, because if, let's say, you decide that you start creating meeting notes, because I've done that, I have that. At one point, I was trying to literally write down the stakeholder, basically whoever attended the meeting, in every single meeting note. And so I could have this perfect archive of time representation and time slivers of when I saw certain people. So I was almost trying to archive my life perfectly in Obsidian. That is the kind of administrative overhead that I'm talking about that I think ends up negatively impacting more than helping. Because you end up doing what I would argue too much overhead. Whereas, don't get me wrong, what I do say is that if it's organic and it's easy for you to just quickly jot it down, and you feel it's oh yeah, I talked with Melanie about this and then John about this, and they were really helpful, that's fine. Jot that down. But if you find yourself feeling like you're trying to record every little detail for the sake that it might possibly be useful one day, I will tell you right now, at least from my experience, you're going to get overwhelmed. It's just impossible. And so, in other words, another way to think of your notes is there are the highlights that matter to you in the moment. And by taking notes on the highlights, you make it higher chance that those highlights you're looking for later on in your brain have somewhere to actually show up organically in Obsidian. Otherwise, strongly recommend against lot of any high admin work where you feel like you're just like, let me look at the Zoom list and let me write down every single person that's in here. And again, I literally have done this. I tried this for like months, and it's just a lot of work. Whereas organically taking meeting notes to be like, oh, like, Bhavana, like said this cool thing. That's a nice organic way to know that like Bhavana was in this onboarding meeting that said this cool thing. Great, right? That's meaningful to me. But sitting here and going like attendees and going like Ben, Amber, Cherry, David, like that's a lot of work. So as a cautionary tale for those who are embarking on this journey, know that is I would advise against that. It gets tiring pretty quickly. Okay, so Jacob here with a great question regarding people with the same name. So great point. I actually thought about this. So Melanie, we use the example of Melanie meeting Melanie Campbell in Netlify versus Melanie Campbell in the conference 2026. My basic solution to people with the same name is basically whoever is the one that is closest to me. In other words, the one that I'm chatting with the most. So if Melanie here, for example, Melanie onboarding meeting all the way back here. So once again, let's say I open up the Melanie note and I'm like, oh, this Melanie Campbell is someone I only met at a conference and not this Melanie, right? Back at the onboarding meeting way back in 2021. I would come back here and go, you know what? I'm just going to say Melanie Campbell Netlify. I'm just going to add a parentheses because this person has a specific association in my brain right now regarding their association. So this is very specifically the Netlify Melanie Campbell. So now when I look at Melanie Campbell here, you'll see that there's two different ones. There's the Melanie Campbell Netlify, and then there's a regular Melanie Campbell right here, which is the one that I care about and the one that, ever since I met at Conference 2026, she's changed my life. That's how I manage that. Now, of course, the programmer in me feels obligated to answer the question, well, what if they're of equal importance? In that particular case, honestly, if you feel up for it, a middle initial is great. Or let's just say, for example, Melanie. So let's open the Melanie Netlify one, and let me move it to the people folder. And so, by the way, I did that through the command palette. You can basically do anything you want with the file, as far as like rename, move, like everything. Like you don't have to drag anything. It's great. So in here, what I would probably do instead is, let's say Netlify feels a little too, then maybe what I would do, especially if Melanie refers to herself as Mel, I might add Mel inside of the file name directly. Then I can just be like, so when I open up, I can just be like Mel Campbell, and then she's in here. But otherwise, I think in parentheses with a little bit of context regarding like what your association is with that person is totally fine. Because here's the thing, right? With the alias here, because again, the reason why you need to do this at this level, at the title level, is because these are literally files in your directories. You can't have them marked the same thing. So what I can do here is put a Melanie Campbell right here, like this. And the reason this, and then once again, this is where Obsidian did a brilliant job with the alias part, is that here, now, if I go in my notes and I do Melanie, you'll see that there actually shows you Melanie Campbell from Netlify or the regular Melanie Campbell. And in this case, to be honest, I probably would add Melanie Campbell. I might even give Melanie Campbell some context here, to be honest. And just for the sake of like making it easy to distinguish. So it might be like conference 2026. But here's the thing though, you'll solve those problems when you come to it. It's easy, I think, to get immersed in all this stuff. But what I'm trying to show you here is that it's all pop and basically here. So now you can be very clear. This is the Netlify one. This is the conference 2026 one. And either way, it allows you to show just Melanie Campbell in the notes, and it doesn't have to appear. So just know that's kind of how my gut instinct for it. Let's see. And then, oh, there's a bit of chat. Okay, so are you using Dropbox to sync notes across devices? Still looking for optimum and have them sync pretty easily. So UMads US, my answer to that, I do use Dropbox to sync my notes, but I also do pay for Obsidian Sync. And I think the Obsidian Sync is useful, especially if you're trying to use Obsidian on your phone. Otherwise, if you're trying to do it without Obsidian Sync and you don't want to pay for it, then I think iCloud is the only option if you're a Mac iOS user. But I do know that Dropbox, I think, works well for Android users. So syncing in that regard, it just depends on whether or not you want to pay for Obsidian Sync or not. But if money is not an option, Obsidian Sync is very clean. And personally, I've trusted them with my data, and it's supposed to be encrypted and everything. So that's how I manage that. And then, yeah, you can see some iCloud fans in here. This is actually important. So let me, as I start to close up, because I think it's important for those watching this stream sort of in the future as you're getting started. So the question here from Wingmat is regarding the process. So the question here is, when taking notes, do you quickly jot down and process them later, or do you have enough of a nailed down process where you can structure it mid-meeting? I think this is one of those things where you play it by ear. For me personally, I jot down notes as they see fit. And then, to be honest, I don't edit them. And this is, I think, the key thing I think that's important for people getting started with Obsidian is, yes, editing is nice, processing notes is nice, but I think it's way more important to just write it down to begin with. As you get more attuned to how your brain wants to structure notes, you'll start to what I call refactor your notes. In other words, you'll move pieces of your notes into new notes and then link them together. And you'll start basically creating relationships intentionally. But I say it becomes more natural when you have that problem to solve. Whereas what I find a lot of the mistake people make is they try to refactor too much ahead of time. They try to perfectly, once again, it's that administrative piece. If you find yourself spending so much time trying to put everything in its place, and most importantly, you're frustrated by it, if you enjoy it, I say garden away all day long. But if you're finding it's tedious, don't bother with it. Take down what's important and then move on. But the other piece I need to mention as well is that everything you saw me do today, I did manually. So in other words, I went in there, I created a people node, I moved it, I decided to create this format, and then I manually recreated here. So what I need to tell you now is that, call it in another session that we talk about, templates are a very big part of notes eventually, because if you start finding yourself repeating yourself a lot, you're going to be like, there's got to be a way for me to templatize this. And so in other words, what do I mean by that? So if I create a new note, once again, and let's do Melanie Campbell. So right now I don't have a Melanie Campbell in my notes. So I'm going to go ahead and create that. What I can do, well, one, I have a whole automation process going on, is that using the command palette, I can insert a template. And then, what template? I'm going to insert a people template. And so this people template comes with this whole thing that I've established for myself that I found useful for people. It actually needs to update a little bit. But about what I want to remind myself of, here are my logs, what did they recommend, what notes. These are things that I personalize to myself. But just know that Obsidian has a lot of opportunity for automation and simplifying things so that you don't have to recreate and copy and paste stuff all the time. So just know that when you're ready for the next step of talking about, I think for most people, templates is the next step. So I think I'll find some time to stream on that next so that people can get a full intro to that. But I think that's the key to getting started. So let me see. Let me check out the chat real quick. Okay. Connor here. Great question. How do you differentiate between daily notes and Netlify 2021 conf notes? Great question. So remember that the daily notes are just timestamps. So if we have, let me go. Do I have the other vault open? I do. So as far as this conference 2026, okay, let me just make it conference 2021 to be honest. And the thing is that I can just say that it's a date here. And this still allows it to relate to it, but this is about call it starts on, when does the thing start? It starts on this date. And so this is how I create those relationships without blurring them together. And that way the daily notes stay completely separate, but when I'm looking at 2028, I can see that, oh, look, conference 2021 also happened on this date. So it's that linked relationship that I know it's going to take some getting used to for people who are new to it, but it's there for you. And that's how I would basically manage that. So great. Okay, yeah, so Jason, how did template happen on Create? Yeah, the templater plugin. Okay, so just to brief, I guess for brief inspiration as we wrap up for today, let me go ahead and show that. So let me open my other vault, show you real quick. Oh, that's not my other vault. Where's my vault? Here's my vault. Okay, so basically if you're wondering how that happened automatically, inside of Templar, there is a way for you to basically say, hey, when you create a new note, oh no, is that not it? I think, oh, here we go. Whenever you create a new note, use this particular template. And so without going into details, because I think, to be honest, we covered this in the past stream, so I will try to link that in the show notes, but I have this base note template, and the base note template is basically this giant block of JavaScript that says, hey, if it includes this particular marker, use this particular page template. And so you can see I have a lot of else if conditions, but over time, I've established that there were things that I wanted to be very consistent about. So that's how I'm dealing with it. And so this is how you could get it to automatically do it without like creating a new note and then inserting it manually. So like I said, a lot of ways to do automation on Obsidian. So as you have questions, please send them my way. So you're like, I'm trying to solve this problem, want to automate this. How do I do this? I'd love to try to help figure that out because I love figuring out how to push Obsidian to the limits. So, all right, with that, let's go and switch over. Okay, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much, everyone in the chat, for asking your question and, again, interacting with one another to help share your experiences. Honestly, that's one of the reasons I keep doing this and I have a lot of fun with this. And with that, okay, so as a quick review, we've basically covered some of the updates in the ecosystem, but most importantly, we talked about some of the philosophies of getting started with Obsidian, which is basically treat it as a markdown file system where you simply add the notes that you care about. And then once you've done from step one, then you're going to start adding links and start creating relationship between those things. And then over time, as you start to do that, you'll start to eventually graduate the problem you're looking for and how you want to search for notes. Because once again, we talked and then about CRMs, relationship managers, so that if ever you want to look across how a certain person relates to an idea. Because for example, I don't know about you all, but I'm very big on like, oh, Jack told me about this article. Let me try to find it out. And so my first instinct is to look for Jack, and then Jack will show me what articles he recommends. Like those relationships occur organically if I'm recording them in the right way. And so that's the kind of stuff that I look for versus like, also like yesterday I saw this article. How do I take a look at that? And then that's where we talked about time as another dimension of looking at notes. Anyhow. All right. With that, I think we're coming to a close. So thanks everyone for coming to hang out today. As far as the schedule for next week, you can check out benkozen.io/schedule. So once again, thanks everyone for joining. It's been a lot of fun. Hope you all have a wonderful week and a great weekend.